All right, hopefully we got y'all back on here. I don't know, man. Y'all ever have one of those days where the technology just does not want to work? Like I'm there. It's a Friday. I'm ready for the weekend, man. And if hopefully y'all can get back on here. I know we had to stop the other one and restart another one, but my computer just went blank, man. Like it went blue screen of death, and
Oh,
then was just gone. So appreciate those of you who are getting back in. I'll sort of give y'all a second, but yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. Generally, when we go straight from Zoom to YouTube, it's fine, but it has not been the technology has just not been kind today. So, like I said, football talk, recruiting talk, whatever y'all want to talk about, and I guess we got to talk about COVID a little bit as well. I know it's tiring to talk about that, but sort of what's going on with that and the spiked cases and all that going on as well. So, um, dude, I guess before we got cut off. By the way, what happened on your end when my screen just went out? Did the whole Zoom thing go out because I went out, or did it just leave you going?
it told me that I was the host, which was the first clue that something had gone awry. It told me that I was the host, then it was just me on the big screen, and I kicked it back to you, and you were not there. And so that's sort of how that went.
So was it still streaming? Do you
And
think?
then it ended. It streamed for a little bit, and then it ended. I was trying to explain to the crowd what was going on, and I was gonna try to invite you back in, and then it just kicked me off. So here we are on our second
Ah,
attempt.
yes, our second public attempt, and actually our
Public attempt, yeah.
our sixth attempt of the day because we were trying to do something different that I thought was going to be actually pretty cool. Ultimately, we want to maybe stream these things to multiple platforms and sort of do it that way. But anyway, all right, we're back now. If it goes out this time, guys, I hate to say it, but it just was not meant to be, and we'll probably just see you next week. But yeah, so let's get down to it, Chris. John Darius Morgan, commitment from Alabama. We talked about him on the podcast a bit as well, so I guess we won't go maybe quite as in depth for people who already heard that. But first of all, you want to just go into the recruiting side of it and how South Carolina landed him. And he was a guy, we had been told recently, hey, keep an eye on this kid. Maybe he hasn't been talked about enough as far as being someone South Carolina's going after. And then next thing you know, boom, the guy's committed.
Yeah, it came together fairly quickly. He did have the offer, like earlier this spring, but it just sort of laid low for a little while for whatever reason. But behind the scenes, and I think South Carolina liked it that way. They had sort of turned up the heat. No visits going on, no camps, so it's not like he could come to camp and blow up, and then we're writing about him, and then a bunch of other schools are going, oh, wait a minute, and start looking at him. So they're able to maybe keep him, even though he had an offer list with some nice offers, and even though South Carolina had already publicly offered, a little bit more like under the radar, a little bit more stealth mode for Eric Wolford in South Carolina. And so, once they turned up the heat, and especially seen that way in the past couple weeks, they picked up the commitment from Jordan Davis, and what that allowed them to do, Wes, was they really had one spot. Now they might take another, just depending, but they came into this class eyeing two offensive linemen, and so when you get one committed, not to pressure guys, but if you got a few guys on the board and you're communicating, say, look, we got one spot. We might have two, but really, for all intents and purposes, we got one, and that can sort of have an effect of some guys maybe speeding up their timeline. I would imagine, I'm not totally sure, but I would imagine that played a role in Morgan going ahead and pulling the trigger.
Well, like you said, man, it kind of, I mean, and frankly, there are some guys that I think maybe wanted to be in this class that maybe now, you look at a guy like Cedric Nicely, who I think South Carolina has been in on. They've sort of been his biggest offer for a while. I talked to him after he visited for the junior day, and sometimes, man, you can just tell when a guy really seems to be locked into South Carolina, and he's always, to me, really seemed to like South Carolina. And, when you sort of get it down to where there's maybe one spot left and like you said, it's not really a pressure tactic. It's more just like, hey, here's where we are.
Yeah.
And, John Darius Morgan decided to take the slot. And that kind of, everybody's known there were two slots. And I was thinking the other day, man, I was like, Eric Wolford normally has about, if he's going to take a 5-man class, he's got like 3 of them committed sometimes like before the previous signing day. And, I was like, I bet Eric Wolford's getting a little antsy over there because he doesn't have anybody committed. And then he gets his class like locked in like 8 days.
Yeah.
So, and he has, I think you have 2 guys, and I think Jordan Davis, more of a tackle. John Darius Morgan, I think probably more of a guard. Now, we've talked about this a little bit. If you're Eric Wolford, do you still turn around? You said maybe take another. If it was you, would you sort of turn around and maybe try to, if you can land them, take one of these JUCO guys as well? Just because we've seen him play that balancing act before. It looks like Jazz Turnitin is probably, at least right now, would be your starter at left tackle. So if a JUCO guy can come in and help, it really can sometimes balance your classes out. And if you told me that you could have a 3-man class with, a freshman tackle, a freshman guard, and maybe an instant impact JUCO, that's really a probably really strong 3-man class. So if it's you, would you take that, I guess, approach?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I probably would. Now you got to keep in mind there's a lot of needs. And South Carolina really we get this question a lot less. How many guys at each position and how many guys total? And at certain positions, we know, like we knew that 2 offensive linemen most likely. We knew 2 running backs, 1 quarterback, probably 1 tight end, etc. But there are certain positions where it's like, wide receiver. I mean, they may take a bunch if they can get a bunch, And so I think it depends, because maybe they're going to look at it as a whole staff, and Will Muschamp decides, man, we really need, if it comes down to squeezing, hey, we got a couple more spots to play with. I really want to devote it to, say, receiver or say DB, whatever it may be. And so you got to consider those things. But if available, I think it's a good idea, because like you said, you do, last year you bring in Turnitin, but hey, next year he's going to be a senior because he's a JUCO guy. You also have Dylan Wanham will be a senior next year. You'll have Nichols and Moore on the roster. You'll have some other guys, but you always have to consider the possibility of, especially this day and time in college football. I mean, what if there's some roster attrition, or what if they saw last year that some guys get hurt, And so that's why we saw Ja'Kai Moore and Jalen Nichols play as freshmen, at tackle and help them win some games or play pretty well. And so, I think in that situation, because Jordan Davis is more of a developmental guy, I think we can all agree. When you look at the whole picture, it might not be a bad idea to bring in, say, an Anthony Belton or a Caleb Etienne, if you can get a type of guy like that, to bring in a junior college guy to be able to have a guy that's ready to step in if needed for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I mean, dude, what if Dylan Wanham just has an outstanding junior year? I mean, this was a very highly rated kid that came into South Carolina, number, I can't remember, top 8 tackle in the country. I think I can safely say, like, way up there. What happens if Dylan Wanham has a huge year and then decides, hey, I'm just gonna go pro? So then there's one of your tackles right there that's gone. So I think that you have a situation there where you keep adding good players, man. If you keep adding good players, then that sort of helps you guard against things like that, I guess. And are they always ready to play immediately? No, but that doesn't really matter. If you just keep inserting them in your system, get them ready to, 2.5 years down the road, then all of a sudden you actually have built some depth. And I think that's what we've seen Eric Wolford do. By the way, have you read, Chris, this letter from Ray Tanner yet? I know it came out like right when we were trying to get going. Have you read it yet?
No, I have not. It was on the list, and it, like you said, it came out right when we were hopping on here, and I wasn't able to. I was trying to sort of skim it, like,
yeah.
all that.
All right, so let's move on. We've got a question. By the way, thanks for thanks for y'all just hanging in there with us. We got a couple of questions. Yeah, let's hit these questions, Chris, and then I'm gonna let you answer a couple of them. I'm gonna read this letter and then tell everybody what it says.
All right.
So Sean and Bo City both want to talk receivers and receivers recruiting. Does Keon Coleman's top 3 give you guys any additional confidence that we are firmly in it for him? I think South Carolina's been firmly in it, but to use that phrasing, but to actually land him, I don't know, Chris. I still think it's tough. Now I think we have him a 3-star on Rivals. To me, the kid's like a bona fide star. I think he's really, really good. Great athlete, big but can run, high points to football, basketball background, which we always talk about with wide receivers. And he's a great basketball player with that. That's why Kansas is in the top 3 is because of the basketball aspect. I don't know about you, man. I think South Carolina's in it. I think they feel like they're in it, but can they actually land him? I don't know, dude. That to me, that might be tough. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, look, it started with Brian McClendon on staff, was recruiting him hard. And then the staff changeover with Joe Cox, I mean, really didn't miss a beat. And, they built a really good relationship. Will Muschamp's been working that one really hard as well. And so I think, I was very curious about what his league group was going to be. I did feel like South Carolina would make it, whether it was 10, 5, however many, and he ended up cutting it all the way down to 3. Now, we know sometimes, especially at a sort of a crazy time like this, kid might have a top 3, and it could certainly change. Somebody new could offer and jump in, could change things up. When is he going to decide? I mean, that's another thing that you got to consider with a guy that hasn't been on campus. I know on the surface, you look at, a Louisiana kid, and it does seem like a tough pull, particularly when he's got, like you said, Wes, the Kansas thing with the basketball aspect. You also got Les Miles, who, of course, was at LSU in his home state for quite some time, had success there. And then you got Oklahoma, who's done an excellent job with receivers. That's the other 2 schools in his top 3. So, yeah, it certainly looks like a difficult pull, but he's somebody that South Carolina's really prioritized as well. And so I think that he's a guy that they seem to have a legitimate shot with, just like you said. Now, when is he going to decide? If he does commit somewhere early, is it going to hold? All those are, I think, fair questions right now. But Gamecocks have got some guys in this class who can play receiver, or sort of classified as an athlete, or a guy like Sam Reynolds who can, do a lot of things. You got an Omega Blake who can, potentially play DB or receiver, sort of on the board as an athlete. But they got a lot of good ones on the board that are intriguing, whether it's Malachi Bennett, Derwin Burgess, Keon Coleman, who we just talked about. Jordan Mosley, who's a Tennessee commitment. Simeon Price, who's a really good athlete out of Florida, who could play a bunch of different positions. Raheem Sanders, who's committed to Arkansas. I think they'll continue communicating with him. So there's a bunch of guys on the board, and we just covered it a minute ago. They sort, hey, how many receivers will they maybe take? I don't know the answer to that. It sort of depends how many good ones can they get. There's obviously some type of limit, and it would tend to limit itself. I don't think South Carolina is going to have 7 really good receivers all wanting to jump in, but I do think there's been a push to upgrade there, in the athleticism and the skill and the speed categories, and they've got some really interesting. It's sort of an interesting range of guys there.
Yeah, and that sort of leads right into the other question from Bo about big time wide receivers to look out for, and like you said, man, I think, and I'm gonna write about this today, but I think the trend for this class has just been versatility and getting guys that are playmakers, and getting guys that you feel like are good enough athletically to help you, but maybe they can play multiple spots. Maybe you don't even know what their best spot is, and you get them in and sort of see where they fit best as far as their own skill set and as far as what you already have on campus. And I think we've seen a need for some guys who can stretch the field. We've seen a need for more playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. But then these guys, when you look, like an Omega Blake, he's a wide receiver. I tend to think he ends up staying there, but with his length, playmaking ability, does he possibly have a future, at defensive back as well? Yeah, I think they like him there too. So with all these guys, I think it's just about getting some athletes in and seeing, who fits best where. But I mean, all those guys you mentioned, I think there's several that South Carolina, maybe outright leads for right now. And then others, like Coleman, who they're in the top three, obviously publicly. I think the key with Coleman is to get him to keep an open mind long enough to get him out on campus. The recruiting dead period just got extended again. So basically, I saw Chad Simmons tweeted that he's heard some talk about possibly they're not even being recruiting visits allowed during the season, or at least early season. There's been some chatter. So can you get him to hold off? Or even, if he commits somewhere, can you get him to at least still visit your campus? I think Coleman's one of those guys. I mean, when kids visit, man, generally they really like what they see at South Carolina. It's just a matter right now of him staying open-minded long enough to get him, to campus, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And going back to what you mentioned about visits, is there has been some talk circulating behind the scenes in recruiting about maybe no in-person recruiting, like you said, during the season. I remember hearing some chatter in those circles that, maybe not until December, which would basically be the end of the season. Now, will that happen? We don't know yet. But we did hear, what was it, like in the spring, like early in all the COVID stuff, right when they shut things down, early on, you remember, Wes, we heard, hey, probably no in-person recruiting until September at least. And that's exactly progressively we've gotten there. Mm-hmm. And so I know some recruits, and that might be where some of it has come from, not saying where Chad's come from. I don't know, but, some prospects have been told by college staff, so there might not be any in-person recruiting until December. Now, think about why they may be saying that, to get guys to go ahead and jump in because, hey, you're not going to be able to go visit. But is there some teeth behind it? It's very possible. And right now we're in a period of, we're all still moving towards the season and having football for sure as of right now. But the everything with the numbers and everything has caused everybody to sort of say, whoa, where are things? And fans and visits and all these different things is even more of a talking point right now.
Yep, and we'll lead that right in. I see we do have another question. We'll lead that right into Ray Tanner's letter, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read the most sort of important part here. Let's see. All right. Letter from Ray Tanner today. He says, we are at a pivotal point in our athletic department history now. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit a lot of businesses hard. Higher education and college athletics are no exception. We know what was lost in the spring semester. We do not really know what we could lose in the fall semester, but we are working through the various scenarios. And I think here's the sentence that probably has people talking, even though it's kind of obvious. A return to normal will not happen this fall. We are trying to determine what the new, quote, normal will be. You have likely seen reports from other Power 5 schools around the country on what they are doing to make ends meet, from salary cuts to furloughs and budget reductions. We have discussed all of those options and more in the athletics department. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. You have seen Coach Muschamp, Staley, Martin. They've all taken voluntary salary reductions. Ray Tanner did as well. Late last week was announced that many of our staff, talking about athletic staff, I believe, will be required to take furloughs this year, ranging between 2 to 4 weeks. The coronavirus will dictate if we must do more. This is one of those challenges. At this point, we do not know what the 2020 football season will look like. Our goal is to communicate the plan for the season in early August. We want to be able to gather as much information as possible, working with the SEC office and the member institutions before any decisions are made. These are challenging and, yes, agonizing times. As a coach and administrator, my vow is to provide student athletes with the resources to compete at the highest level, whether it be sports, classroom, community, or in life. Goes on to say he's in regular meetings with Caslin, campus planning groups, Commissioner Sankey, and the other SEC ADs, health and safety of student athletes, coaches, fans, staff, is the most important piece of the puzzle. We want to get you the best and most accurate information as soon as possible to move forward. Let's see. Then he goes on to encourage everyone to be safe and healthy, social distance, and wear your Gamecock branded face covering. So this, and I've had a couple people text me and say, what do you think about the letter? I think it's going to be a discussion piece on the message boards and on Twitter. But also, I think a lot of this we sort of know all this, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do. I think it's probably just a way to look. We have been reporting for some time, and look, things could change, but we've been reporting for some time, sort of whether it's talking here on the podcast or what we post in our reports on the Insiders Forum or in the course of answering questions from our subscribers on the Insiders Forum. Is there going to be football? And we get the question a lot. And the answer is yeah. And it has been, unless something really, really drastic changed. And obviously the financial implications are a huge reason for that. We've covered all that. But I think it's a way, I say that to illustrate the point of there's always like this daily uncertainty, even if people hear every now and then, yeah, there's going to be football, or yeah, there's probably going to be some fans. Well, even with the fan part in particular right now, I think people are wondering because they look at the news and they go, okay, cases are up, or, what's going on. They just wonder. And so I think this is probably just a way for Ray Tanner to, just get his voice out there, reassure people that they're working on it, sort of just let them know that even if there's not a substantial update, that here's where things are and here's where they still are. So I don't know that there's anything super, informative there. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's probably not a lot to pass on right now, but I think it's probably good for the fan base to, hear his voice and hear these different things and sort of what they've been working on.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the fact that the cases have sort of spiked in the state of South Carolina right now is obviously concerning, and I think probably part of the reason that he decided to put out that letter as well. And I'm hopeful, man, that with the spike right now, that the day, because if there's a spike in cases, then anything as far as deaths or results of the cases is sort of, it lags behind, by 2 or 3 weeks, because you have to see what the virus is actually going to do. I'm hopeful that with the ages of people that are getting it now going way down, that there's not like that direct spike in daily deaths as well, that it's more, okay, there are more cases, but because these people are younger, the virus doesn't seem to have near as much of effect on younger, healthy people, that we're not going to see this spike as far as the actual result of more cases. So I think it's concerning that there are more cases. We obviously need to do maybe more, wear our masks, and that's obviously a Columbia ordinance now as well. But as far as like what it actually means, I'm hopeful that it's not going to mean a ton more, hospitalizations and stuff like that. But only time will tell, I guess, how all this is going to play out. But I do get, there's concerns right now because, you probably follow it closer than I do with your work on Palmetto Preps, Chris. But, the South Carolina High School League sort of, do you know exactly what they said yesterday as far as, hey guys, we're in danger here?
Yeah. I mean, Jerome Singleton, the commissioner of the South Carolina High School League, spoke yesterday, and he said, with some of the current trends, and obviously we don't know where things are right now, but with the way things are now, the way things have been trending and maybe are trending, that things are in jeopardy right now. Mm-hmm. And so I guess one of the aspects of that is, we've seen some schools that have started workouts late. We've seen some that have postponed them, like Greenville County, for instance, in the upstate, had started workouts and postponed them. We've also seen some that I saw, there was one county or school district somewhere in the state that pushed, not even going to begin workouts until like July 20th. The high school league originally had come out with just recommendations of hey, when you reopen, we're going to do it in phases. Here's what we recommend that you do. And they actually took some heat about that because they left it up to each district instead of saying, hey, everybody's going to open up at this particular time. They basically went off the National Federation of High School guidelines. But now, they've actually put out, the executive committee of the high school league voted to, basically they're setting these guidelines and they're mandatory. So now schools can get fined. So yeah, I mean, it's, I think they're doing that now because they're trying to really hammer home the idea of you really need to do these things. And to be fair, I haven't heard of any schools that aren't doing them. There very well could be. I know travel baseball, I've heard a lot of talk that they're not doing much of any of their guidelines, what some people are telling me. But a lot of schools are sort of upset with this because maybe some of them, like Greenville County, shut down and they were already felt like they were doing everything. But it's just another way for them to illustrate that we really got to do these things if we're going to get to the season. Wes, a lost high school football season would really, and I'm not saying that will happen, hopefully it won't, but it would be really, really, really tough on schools athletic department wise. It would be devastating in a lot of ways. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it would be brutal. I hope that's not where this is headed. I hope that's not what happens. Who can say? But I think, man, even there's talk about high school football in the spring. Even if you had to do that, man, would it be weird? Would it suck? Yeah, but does it beat the alternative? Absolutely. So I think you gotta find a way, to hopefully make that happen. All right, we got a couple more questions. Let's hit those. First, talking about Sean again wants to know about Jalen White out of Alabama. I'll take this one. I think South Carolina's in a decent spot with him. I think they're actually maybe rising with him a little bit. You've seen Carolina have some luck with some Alabama guys in this class, and I think they've done a good job of sort of trying to link all those guys together and say, hey, let's all of you come to South Carolina sort of as a group. And we've sort of wondered and thought that South Carolina was going to have to hit some other states. And, with South Carolina as a state being down a bit and North Carolina doing what they're doing in North Carolina, Alabama may be that state, man, where South Carolina signs a few more guys than maybe they normally do in most years. And I think they've got some traction there. We talked about Malachi Bennett. I think they're in the lead for him. And now the guy at running back, Chris, you had your best bets today where you say who's the best bet at each position. I think the guy that sort of they're most trending with would maybe be Ontario Brown from Beach High School there in Georgia. But a lot of these things, again, much like offensive line, you sort of, these guys know where they are. There's about 4 guys that they're really sort of focused on at running back, and there's basically 1 spot left. And these kids know that, and they know if they want the spot, you kind of have to take it. So I think Carolina's in it, but I do think just the timeline of how things play out, when do they want to commit, who decides to take the spot first, probably is the biggest factor there. But Carolina may, you look at the 4 guys that they're after, I'd say Ontario Brown, K1 Powell, Jalen White, and then, the kid that's committed to Louisiana Tech.
Hargrove.
Yeah, I butcher his first name if I'm
Hargrave. Yeah, I butcher
it. Yeah. Those are the 4 guys right now to watch at running back. I think Carolina's in really good shape with Ontario Brown. Maybe leads for K1 Powell. They're right there with Jalen White as well. So, I mean, arguably they're in pretty good shape with 3 of them. So it's going to be more about the timing, of a commitment and who decides to take the spot than anything. All right. Another question here, Chris. Let's see. We played a lot more regular defense last year with 3 linebackers. Do you think this change is due to adjusting the current offenses or more because the body type of the linebacker has changed so much? It's a good question, man. It's there's always a combination of reasons. I would say the biggest reason for me was just, and listening to what the coaches said was the emergence of Sherrod Green. This is a kid that didn't necessarily play quite as good as maybe was expected out of him as a sophomore. Sort of lost his starting spot and then kind of took over as the Sam linebacker last year. And just their best they're always looking for their best combinations. Now, granted, if you're playing a spread team, do you want 3 linebackers out there and not a nickel out there? Probably not. But, based on some of these run-based teams they've played, I think it was a combination of the opponents and just the emergence, Chris, of Sherrod, who I thought played really, really well and deserved to be on the field last year.
Yeah, so there were a few reasons, like you said, Wes went into it. And so last year they played, I remember T-Rob saying it. I think he said 29 or 30% of the time they were in regular with the Sam, Will, and the Mike linebacker. And so a couple aspects to it. One is just like you covered, Green. But secondly, they felt like the first 2 or 3 years they were getting beat a lot on bubbles and screens to the outside and things like that. And that's something that, in just thinking about it, I remember Muschamp talking about that a lot. You remember they even had, T-shirts made about the run game stats and things like that. And they really feel like the bubbles out to the perimeter are an extension of the run game. And that was a stat that they wanted to cut down on. So they felt like that when they had a nickel on the field, if the opposing offense had a tight end, that their tight end was blocking their nickel a lot. So getting a bigger body guy out there like a Green or a Sam linebacker who can handle himself a little bit better in the box and get off those blocks a little bit better, leverage the football, they felt like that would help. So, one, Green playing well and developing. 2, the whole aspect of playing the bubbles better. And 3, probably you could throw in there is just the personnel. I mean, some of the personnel groups you're facing. And so T-Rob, I remember when he talked about it, I think that was this spring, said, hey, we might even play even more than we did last year. So you could see South Carolina, depending on the week and who they're playing, we could see, 35, 40% or more, when you look at the whole course of the year, maybe even more within certain contests. It's going to be interesting to track that.
Yeah, and always obviously depends on opponent, what their scheme looks like, down and distance, a whole combination of a lot of different things in the moment. So it's kind of, I think there's always 2 things at play, sort of big picture things, but then sort of in the moment, just how the season actually plays out, who's healthy. All these things will affect everything. Let's see, Brock Lee. Yeah, I see some new names on here, so appreciate you guys joining us. Brock says, what's your favorite South Carolina game of all time? That's a good question. The most entertaining game of all time for me for South Carolina, I'll go the one that I was at as well. I would say either 2012 win over Georgia. That's when they were both like top 6 in the country. Or I would say the Connor Shaw comeback. I was right on the sideline, literally 5 feet away from Bruce Ellington on the 4th and 15 conversion, or 4th and goal from the 15. I can't remember which it was, in overtime. And just watch it. I mean, that was a movie type stuff. Connor Shaw coming off the bench, leading South Carolina back. It's just super fun game. So I would say those 2 are probably the most enjoyable games to watch, maybe that I remember just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think both of those are great picks. And I think in particular for any Gamecock fan, the 2012 Georgia game should probably be the most entertaining because it was just an absolute beatdown. The stadium was wild. I mean, that game was insane. And so a lot of times, like, you think of certain games, because one that came to mind for me, when you say entertaining, I try to project that upon, well, what are the Gamecock fans, like our audience, going to think of that? The 2011 Georgia game was entertaining, but it was also an absolute, like, I needed, a Gamecock fan would need an entire thing of Tums during that game. It ended up, it was 45-42. It was just wide open. Um, you know, it was close. You know, Georgia scored first, 6-0 after the first quarter. Melvin Ingram fake punt. Jadeveon Clowney as a freshman. You know, the strip sack of Aaron Murray. Georgia, I think, threw like 800 screen passes, and they would get all these yards. And so it was just absolutely wild. It looked like South Carolina had the game in hand, and then Georgia scores again late, but then they hang on. So that game was extremely entertaining too. I know a lot of Gamecock fans were thrilled with the result, but during the game, it was sort of it was one where you needed some antacid, I would think, during it. But I think your picks are really good too, for sure.
That game was 45-42.
Yeah.
The thing about that game was South Carolina scored 45 points, but the offense did not play well.
No.
Like Stephen Garcia did not play well.
No.
The defense did not play well. Gave up 42 points, but the defense won the game.
Yeah.
Like if you looked at that score, you'd be like, man, offensive shootout. But really, the offense didn't play well, but the defense didn't play well either on a down-to-down basis, but scored like as much as the offense did, basically.
It was a wild – I mean, you had the Ingram fake punt was one score, and then Ingram picked up the Clowney strip sack, right? I mean, that was
Clowney was that Aaron Murray?
Yeah, it was of Aaron Murray, yeah. And then
he threw him like a rag doll.
And there was a pick six in that game. Antonio Allen picked off Aaron Murray and returned it for a touchdown.
And didn't Gilmore have a fumble recovery that he ran back or something?
I don't know if that was in that.
Or was that a different game?
That was a different game, I think. I could be wrong. I'm going to try to look over the box score right now. Yeah, I mean,
that's a weird looking box score.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. I mean, Georgia had 436 yards. They had 8 more first downs. They held the ball for 30 seconds more. They did have 1 more turnover. So South Carolina had 2 defensive scores and a special team score. You know, Garcia passed for 142 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks. Lattimore did have another really good game. He was 176 yards on 27 carries, of course.
Well, he did that.
And I don't even remember him having a great, like, that's the thing. You remember a lot of great Lattimore games that, like, his fresh, you know, the 2010 game. You think about that one, 37 for 182. Like, that's etched in our memory. He had 176 rushing yards in this game, and you don't even really remember it. You know,
I remember he had a key long run late in that game when it was just obvious that the offense, as far as the passing game goes, was not going to do much. I don't know. What about y'all? Everybody throw it in the chat. What was your favorite game? You got any other? I'm sure there are other games. I mean, Alabama 2010, I'm sure, is up there for some people. All right, we got another question from WJM41. I don't know how you came up with that, buddy. Due to financial issues as a result of COVID, if South Carolina underperforms this year, are we forced to hang on to Muschamp due to the buyout? I don't know, man. There's so many unknowns right now with COVID, with the athletics department in general. It's almost, I think, an unanswerable question. I mean, if you're South Carolina, you hope that neither one of those things is part of the equation, that, you know, that COVID, the curve dies down again, that the football team wins again, that everything, you know, a few months from now is really looking up. But do we know that? Obviously not. What do you think, Chris? I think it's just very, very hard to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one. You know, I'll just keep my answer short on this one. It's another one where it's okay to say I really don't know. On this one, I do think, you know, look, Tanner mentioned that in his letter. There's a lot of uncertainties from a financial standpoint, and so one thing we don't know. So obviously, we don't know the answer to the key question is how many games will South Carolina win this year? We need to know that, but we also very much in assessing I guess you could say, like, the financial health of South Carolina and other schools, we need to know that the season is a full season, which we think it will be right now, but we also need to know how many fans are in the stands. I mean, that's going to drive a ton of revenue. If you're talking about a full capacity stadium, full season, that's going to bring in 70 to 80 million dollars, something like that. Just ballparking it. If you take out the fans and you go TV money only, you're cutting that in half or more.
Mm-hmm.
So even for a school that's in pretty good financial shape like South Carolina, they're even having to make cuts. And then you're talking about losing 30, 35, 40, 45 million dollars. That's a lot. And so you got to sort of add those two things together, and it's just not possible to answer right now. It's really not. Could the finances have an effect on it? For sure. But we just don't know that right now.
Yeah, and I think the Tanner's letter, to me, the one thing that stands out is where he said there will not be a normal fall sports. And I think they're setting the stage, man, for the idea of masks in the games if you're a fan.
Yeah.
Like I obviously that really hasn't been broached publicly or talked about a ton, but if the research, because I mean, and you masks don't work, people. I mean, clearly two people being beside each other, both having masks, is going to somewhat limit the exposure to the breath of each person. Like, to me, that's common sense. So if there's any chance that the mask can help slow the exposure or eliminate some of the exposure that might happen, then we've already seen that they're talking about sort of these super spreader events where really it doesn't, one person themselves sort of isolated doesn't really spread this thing all over the place. It's when one person has it, doesn't know that they have it, and then they end up in a crowd at a sporting event, at a wedding, at a gym, something like that. And then it's one person gives it to 20 people. That's when you really have an issue. Yeah. So the mask, if you're wearing a mask, it doesn't even maybe necessarily protect you that much, but it's if you have it, it's protecting the people around you. If you have it, you don't know it, it's protecting the people around you. So my guess, man, and I know this ain't even what the user there asked about. We've sort of gotten off track, but if we're talking about Ray Tanner and the letter and the number of fans potentially allowed, I don't think it's going to be a full house either. My personal opinion, we'll see. But I think it's going to be maybe potentially more people than we thought when we first started talking about this, which was like, what were we talking about? 15%, 20% capacity or something like that?
Yeah, like 15. Well,
or 15,000.
Bad at math, but yeah, 15 or 20,000 fans, right? So that's
okay,
a quarter, something like that.
Yeah, okay. So, but if you had more people, but you said you have to wear masks, and you just mandated it, hey, if you're going to come in, you have to wear a mask, then there's going to be some blowback. There'll be a draw. Some people will be mad, but would you rather be able to go to the game or not? So, well, I think that's where it's headed.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So another interesting thing about it is, you remember a recent board meeting. There's been so many of them lately on various topics, but a recent South Carolina Board of Trustees meeting, Ray Tanner spoke afterward, and his message was, we feel like we're going to be able to get more fans in. Now, maybe that's still the case because of what you said, Wes. If they make people wear masks, maybe they do fit in. But just the narrative has gone from, all right, we're definitely having football. Let's see how many people we can squeeze in this thing. Mm-hmm. To now it's gone to where people are like, are we going to have football anymore? And not even that part may not even be based in reality. There are some people that are becoming a little bit more concerned about the prospects, but I haven't heard anything that says they're moving away from the thought of having football or even doing something like having a shortened season. I haven't started hearing that. Maybe you have, I have not. But it is in the public, in terms of the narrative, it's sort of shifted. And so that just illustrates how things have changed over the last, maybe several weeks, however long ago that was. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the reason there's a public shift is just because of everybody seeing, that WLTX alert or wherever you get your news from, that alerts you get every day saying, hey, guess what? South Carolina just had another record high of daily cases. And I think we got to get the thing leveled off, obviously. And I think the mask mandate, even if you don't agree with the mask or not, the countries that have gone the mask route seem to have destroyed their curve. Like, it's not just flattened, like it's dropped. And it's not always apples and oranges, because I know not, there's a lot of countries out there that are not nearly as big, don't have as big of populations as the United States. But it just seems like when everybody masks up, and I was guilty early on as well. I was like, why are we wearing these? Because the initial word from, up top from the government, from CDC, was you don't need to wear them. And now, but the newest information says yes. So if it gets me football, so I'm for it. I'm all for it. So hopefully, I do think, though, it's just, we've seen the Carolinas, we've seen North Carolina and South Carolina have these record numbers. And so now people are saying, are we going to be able to have football? And now some of that, when we were opening back up, it was kind of obvious that there were going to be,
Oh, yeah.
that it wasn't going to keep going down when you open back up. So, I'd really like to know, what are the numbers like compared to expectations? Now, on that DHEC website, you can see the projections. They're sort of at the high. The actual results have been to the high side of the projections. It's still been within the window, but it has been high. So hopefully at some point, man, we can get this thing back leveled off and dropping. And then I think people will feel a little bit more comfortable about saying, all right, we're definitely going to have football. And what that looks like, who knows? But I'm telling you, man, right now, I guarantee there's going to be some version of masks involved in this, I think. And I think if you're a fan, just go ahead and wrap your head around that, because I think that's what's coming. All right, so let's see. Big picture. Well, we didn't talk much about Omega Blake. Chris, you want to hit him real quick? Committed on Monday. What are your thoughts on Omega as a player?
Yeah, I mean, mentioned earlier that, on the board as an athlete. And so now he's talked a lot with Joe Cox about playing receiver, and he may very well start out as his career as a receiver, but he's a guy that's played quarterback, wide receiver, defensive back at South Point high school level. And Will Muschamp, of course, defensive background, has told him that, hey, you can play DB, you can play receiver, you're on the board as an athlete. And so I personally, Wes, I think his higher upside is at DB. Not to diminish from any potential at wide receiver or his abilities there, but that's just what I think because of the length and the skill set. But he could play either. He's a guy that's got a good competitive edge. He's got some versatility. He was really productive for South Point. And, talking to Devontae Holloman, former Gamecock, who's his head coach there at South Point, he talked a lot about that competitiveness and that versatility, and said, that he's a guy that sort of takes it upon himself to go make plays for their team. And so I think he's expecting a really nice senior year out of Omega Blake.
Yeah, definitely. All right, y'all. I hate to cut it off, but I got to get off here. Let's see real quick. Brock Lee. See, I don't. Muschamp is fired. Who are some coaches you would like to take his place? I don't really want to get into that one. We'll sort of, if that happens, there'll be plenty of names we'll dig in on, I think. Let's see. Is there any more questions in here? We got a few comments. All right, real quick. Which recruiting class of the Muschamp era has done the best job of addressing needs for the team? And then who is your sleeper pick on both offense and defense for this season? Chris, I'll let you take the first one, and then I'll take the sleeper for offense and defense.
Cool. So you gave me the harder one. Appreciate that.
I thought that was a pretty easy one.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think it's this most recent class that came in.
Yeah. So I would agree with that. My caveat, it was just that none of those guys have played at all, right?
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of like the hindsight thing where, like if you look at 2016, I don't know, do you kind of sort of count Javon Kinlaw in that one? If so, that gives it bonus points. Like he was actually in the 17 class, but they committed him as part of that 16 class. But I mean, that one had a lot of guys that for various reasons didn't end up doing much, but it also had guys like Hutcherson and Jake Bentley and Brian Edwards and Kinlaw out of high school. We had to go to JUCO, and Rico Dowdle, Kier Thomas, Kobe Smith, TJ Brunson, DJ Wanham. A lot of guys that really help fill needs. But I would have to say, I would agree 2020 because of like the balance, the fact that they got Marshawn Lloyd, 5-star running back. They got Jordan Birch, edge player, some really good tight ends, DBs. I mean, there's sort of some balance there. And so I would probably say that's the best class in terms of quality and like that balance of fitting needs, but none of them have played. And so we'll find out in a few years, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Sleeper pick. Here's my problem with sleeper pick. What is a sleeper anymore? I mean, I feel like, as far as like current team, we cover every single guy on the team on Gamecock Central. So what does a sleeper even mean? I mean, defensively, can a guy that's a proven starter, can they be a sleeper? I don't know. I mean, I think Jamie Robinson will have but he had a really good year to be a freshman. I thought he had a really good year last year.
Oh yeah.
But I think he's going to be huge in the secondary for South Carolina this year. I think he's a grinder. He's that guy that is going to get better every year and will be a big part of what they do. And I think we'll sort of lock down that nickel spot, if not one of the safety spots. So I don't know what's a sleeper if you're talking about incoming freshman sleeper, like guys that weren't highly recruited. Those guys most of the time don't make immediate impacts. So, I mean, as a sleeper on offense, just somebody who hasn't played, either newcomer or will be playing for the first time this year. I mean, I think Jaheim Bell has a chance to help this year. Now, I think all the freshman offensive skill guys actually have a chance. But I really like Jaheim, and I think even though he had the injury, I think he's pretty far along as far as the offensive skill set goes, and is going to be a pass catcher for them, a guy that can make some plays. So I would go him. I mean, my two sleepers in the recruiting class have been sort of Rashad Amos on offense and Gilbert Edmond on defense. A lot of the other guys are pretty well known and kind of highly recruited. So I don't know, man. Is there a sleeper? Are there sleepers on either side for you, Chris, that are like guys that are not newcomers, like have been on campus, but then we'll see their roles have much bigger opportunity to have a bigger role this year and will step into, that position. I don't know. Like I feel like it's expected for a lot of these guys that are.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, maybe some guys that people are maybe not expecting as much from could be in that sleeper category, even if they know about him. Like Josh Vann may fit in on offense just because we know he's got some talent, right? We saw it in high school. We've even seen some flashes at Carolina, but he was a 4-star guy. He was a highly recruited guy, but because everything is so fresh in people's mind about the struggles that he had last season, he had a bad sophomore slump. He is more talented than that. So could he be a guy that might be a decent pick? Defensively, maybe it's Devontae Davis. Just because he might have played some last year, but he had the Liz Frank injury and had to end up getting surgery. So he's not someone when people are thinking about, okay, who's some D linemen that are going to step up? They're going to think of Sandage. They're going to think of Pickens. They're going to wonder about Jordan Birch's impact as a freshman. I think looking at a Devontae Davis or maybe Jabari Ellis, some guy Ellis has played some, but he's probably going to play more. And so I think those guys may make sense. You're right. When you cover all these guys so much every day, I tend to go towards guys that, hey, maybe here's a guy that maybe folks aren't expecting as much from, and could they do a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. Stephen Atkins, the box of the mask comes in literally on the print, says this product will not provide protection against COVID. I mean, dude, a lot of that is probably a matter of protecting yourself legally, because it's not a medical device. A lot of these, especially the cloth masks that you're talking about, are not medical devices. But the point of the mask is not to protect you from COVID. The point of the mask is if everybody is wearing it, the mask protects the other people around you if you have COVID. So if there's 20 people and everybody's wearing a mask and one person in the group has it and doesn't know it, they're then not breathing and giving it to everybody else. So does your mask necessarily keep you from getting it? No. And is it foolproof? No. But the whole thing is about percentages and lowering the percentage of people that get it so that the spread comes down. So, and the thing is, if even the mask works like 5%, is it really that hard to wear it for 10 minutes at the grocery store? I mean, you don't have to wear it at home. You don't have to wear it outside. You don't have to wear it in your car. So I think that's, I mean, if the science says that masks in the stadium will keep it from spreading as much as it would have without the mask. Now, the thing that does go in a stadium's favor is that it's outdoors, which I think very much helps, at least according to the current science. So we'll see. And yes, the science changes. The thought process on this stuff has changed a lot as time has gone on, as they learn new information. So, yeah, it does change from time to time. But I think the countries that have been heavy mask users that seem to have the virus very much under control, whereas we don't really seem to have it under control here. But anyway, we're not going off into that. You got any closing thoughts, Chris?
No, man. I think we're good. Good chat today. Good questions. Appreciate everybody.
Yeah, appreciate y'all coming. Subscribe on Gamecock Central. Subscribe on YouTube. He's Chris Clark. I'm Wes Mitchell. We'll see you next time.